one of the first things I heard was Dybek. And I felt so great. Actually, that's how it was always said in my neighborhood. My nickname was Dibs. And it was only later that that Y got changed. And then there were Gowumki on top of it. So I knew I was home. I thought I'd begin by just reading a very short poem. It's kind of the season for this. It's called Penance. It was always Good Friday, those Saturday afternoons. Stooped babkas and black coats and babushkas, kneeling in the marble aisles before racks of vigil candles, faces buried in their hands. Their weeping echoed through the dim church, as foreign as their droned language of prayer. I stood in line, waiting the priest's question, alone or with others? And my turn of confession, trying to imagine the terrible sins of old women. So I thought I'd start out set in a church because libraries, I think, for writers are the sacred places. And that's certainly true for me. Not that they replace religion, but that in many ways they're as much at the center of your life as any other institution that you come in contact with. I thought Leonard asked me for a little statement when he invited me to do this. I thought I'd just read what I wrote. The Lawndale Library and the Marshall Square Library in Little Village, Gads Hill and Pilsen, were essential way stations where my library card was like a passport that could be stamped over and over in my personal journey to becoming Polish American. One thinks, and rightly so, of libraries as an intellectual refuge, but they are, at least they were for me, an affair of the heart. I didn't go to them as I went to school, or for that matter to church, because I had to. They were elective. I went because I wanted to be there, because I wanted to be there, because I knew, because I had to be there, because I knew before I knew what yearning meant, that I yearned for what they offered, an inner life, a glimpse of all the varied stories and histories of not just the world but the universe and all its terror and beauty. I'd walk into the library off 26th Street in Little Village, and I would be sailing with Odysseus, or with Magellan, or Jack London, or Huck and Jim. And when I walked back out on 26th Street, I'd know, although I had not yet read Emily Dickinson, that indeed there is no frigate, no coracle, no raft, no lifeboat, like a book. One of the things about Chicago writers is that when you're outside the city, New York, West Coast, East Coast, that's how you're described as a Chicago writer. But anybody from Chicago knows that you're not a Chicago writer, you're a neighborhood writer. Studs Terkel understood that when he set his book on Division Street and went neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood, up and down that spectacular street. We don't think of Saul Bellow we think of Saul Bellow as a Hyde Park writer. And the ethnicity Jewish. We think of Gwendolyn Brooks as a Bronzeville writer, of Harry Mark Petrakis as a Greek writer from Halsted Street, Sandra Cisneros, Nelson Algren, we think of him as Bucktown, right up here. So and my little hood was a little village in Pilsen. And one of the things that I loved about the Chicago library system was that Sure, there was a great cultural center downtown, but the libraries that served me day in and day out were like the Chicago writers. That is, that each one had its own neighborhood. And each library took on the accents of the people surrounding it and the complexions. And that's still the case today. I never really understood that Gads Hill Library, which was also my father's library, was named after Dickens' house. I kept thinking there must have been a hill around there somewhere and looking for it. It was just flat like every other place. Marshall Square Library was the one that I went to the most. But those libraries were not only just sacred, but interestingly so, subversive. That is, thoughts that we didn't have in the house were available there on the shelves. If you heard something that you weren't sure about, you could for sure find the contra of it, the anti of it. And in that way, that kind of personal democracy that one needs inside themselves as well outside themselves thrived. One of the things that, in the relationship between writers and libraries, I don't know a writer who doesn't have the same feeling about the sacredness of those places. But the sense of identity, your identity as a writer starts there. Because no matter how far back you go, you're a reader before you're a writer. And one of the things that libraries understand is they understand that everybody who comes in there is an artist. What do I mean by that? I mean that, well, if only for dreaming, we'd all be artists. But the other thing that makes everyone an artist is reading. Because unlike all the other art forms, which come through the senses, dance, theater, the visual arts, film, photography. If you ever turn your head in a theater and look at the audience, take it off the screen, you actually see an audience of dreamers. There's that look on everybody's face, and they're just kind of in a stupor. The difference about reading, which literature requires, is that it's far more active. There's a passive quality to looking at a painting. I'm not saying it's entirely passive. Of course it isn't. That is, that two people can look at a painting and each one will have a different response to it. But reading literature requires a reader. And a reader is making it up in a way that somebody viewing a film and viewing a painting or listening to music is not. For me, the only thing that approaches reading as an art is dancing to music. A reader is a dancer, and the music is the book that the reader is reading. And so, thinking about that, sometimes I go to libraries and I see these long tables or carrels, and people are all sitting there, and they've got a book spread out before them, or now they're looking at a computer screen, and I think it's all full of dancers. I think that libraries understand that. They understand how different that art form that they're stocking in those shelves and making available to the public at large is. You can also tell when you're in a library, if you're like me and you do a lot of readings. I can't tell you how different it is to read at a university and to read at a library. You just know you're in immersive democracy when you're reading in the library. There's just a different vibe, a different feeling in the room, and you get that totally cosmopolitan sense in terms of gender, race, religion, ethnicity, and generation in a library that you just don't find. You just don't find at a university. one of the reasons that I continue to write about the neighborhood I grew up in, besides the fact that I'm from Chicago and that's just what you do if you are, is that you can write about a little few square miles like Pilsen. And if you just describe what goes on day in and day out accurately, you cannot help, it's impossible, it's inescapable, not at the same time to be writing about the great themes of democracy. You're going to write about assimilation, you're going to write about race, you're going to write about ethnicity, which is the currency of Chicago writing. You're going to write about the dreams of democracy, the promise of America. It's just inescapable. That notion that the universal always resides in the specific is never more true than when you're talking about writing about a neighborhood. And that's the exact same reason that somebody like Algren is writing about Bucktown. All those themes are available to him if he just writes accurately about this area. Why Bellow is writing about Hyde Park, the exact same thing, different. Oh, class, by the way, I should have included that. Class is inescapable. I thought I'd tell you a little anecdote about a great, what I think of as reading is dancing. When one of the people who was the absolute most important to me in growing up was my Polish grandmother. She couldn't speak a word of English, my Busia. When she died, I was, of course, heartbroken. And as a kind of a tribute, I wrote a story called Blood Soup. And in the story, what happens is that a woman is brought home by her daughter and son-in-law so that she doesn't have to die in a hospital. They want her to have a home death. And the daughter and the husband go out one day and they say to the son, whose name is Steve, watch Busha while we're gone. We'll be back soon, don't worry about it, she's okay. As soon as they're out of the house, Busha calls, Stevie. He goes in and he says, are you okay, Busha? Not okay, dying. He said, well, what can I do? She said, I need blood soup. She doesn't say blood soup. I need charina. And he, Stevie, who is kind of becoming Americanized, that's the one Polish food he's not too fond of. He likes everything else. But when he sees that jar of blood in the refrigerator with the wax paper rubber banded on top, even though Busha keeps telling him, it's a fruit soup, it's a fruit soup. No, Busha, it's not a... So he's trying to get out of it, and he says, well, how? She says, all her sons are butchers. She says, go to Antek and get duck's blood. And he says, in what? She says, get my holy water jar. So if you remember, we're almost getting to that time of the year when you go to the parish church and you get your holy water for the year. And the idea is that you don't want to get too much, but you don't want to get too little. So a perfect jar for it is a pickle jar, but then it's going to smell of pickles. So we always used the mayonnaise jar, Miracle Whip jar. So in the story, the holy water's in a Miracle Whip jar, and Stevie says to Busha, what should I do with the holy water? Spill it in my bedpan. Oh my God. Now he knows this is serious. You don't spill holy water in a bedpan. So he goes off with the empty holy water jar to get duck's blood on this quest. And of course it's illegal. You can't get it anymore. And he knows that. But off he goes to save Busha. So the story came out. About 4 years later, I received from an Ivy League school a letter. And it said, dear Mr. Dybek, I'm a PhD student and I'm writing on ethnic writers, and part of my thesis for my PhD is I want to write about your story. And I'm sending you my essay and asking if you would read it and give me any reactions. So I read his essay, and I mean, I have to tell you, that the idea about writing, as I said, is everything has to be specific. So in my mind, people are divided up into two categories, two major categories. There are people who put mayonnaise on their sandwiches. And there are people who put Miracle Whip on their sandwiches. And the people who put Miracle Whip on their sandwiches would never eat a sandwich with mayonnaise. And the people who put mayonnaise on their sandwich would never eat a sandwich with Miracle Whip. And we were a Miracle Whip family. So in the story, like in real life, when the guy goes to church to get the holy water, it's in a Miracle Whip jar. So what did this guy from, I won't tell you the school, what did this guy do with Miracle Whip? What he did with it was, only a miracle would save Busha. And the kind of miracle, given the relationship between Polish people and Catholicism, would of course have to do with transubstantiation and the idea that bread becomes flesh and wine becomes blood. And what's Stevie out there looking for? Blood, which will restore Busha, etc., etc., etc. So for me, there's two possible lessons in that story when I tell it to my classes. One lesson is to make fun of that guy. The other lesson, which I think is the right lesson, is to say, that guy's a dancer. That guy is making that story up. He's participating in that story. Those ideas were locked in the images. Did I ever think of it for a second? Absolutely not. Did he open those images up? Yeah. So when I say, somehow, on some level, that libraries know that every person who walks in that door, who's a reader, is an artist. That's what I'm talking about. Each person who reads those books in the library is reading a different book, is making it up. I want to tell you one last thing, and then I'll end. And I think there's supposed to be questions and answers, which I'd be happy to take any questions you have. Which is that after The Coast of Chicago came out, I didn't have another book for about 8 years. And then I came out with a couple of them. But in that time, if you don't keep producing books, what happens is the books you have go out of print. And Mary Dempsey told me that they wanted to make The Coast of Chicago a one book, one Chicago, one book, whatever. Yeah, but the books weren't available anymore. They were out of print. So she decided she would see if there were maybe enough books in the library system that they might be able to do it that way. And they did a huge search all through Chicago. And the only place they found The Coast of Chicago was in a little Hasidic library way up on the northwest side. And all the books that they had bought were gone. Stolen. And of all the things I'd ever heard, I thought that was the greatest compliment I ever got. Is that all the books that the libraries had bought were stolen. And so, if you get back to your library, if you could check and see if a copy or two is still there, I'd really appreciate it. So I'm going to end with I started with a poem. I'm going to end with a poem. I mentioned my Busha. This is a poem about my Busha. I'm going to read a little tiny part of a poem called Autobiography to set this up. It's only about 10 lines, and then read the other poem. Our Lady of Sorrows, the Black Virgin of Czestochowa, was my girlfriend. Once while praying, I saw her smile. Any old woman palsied with love and terror, I call babushka. No word in English turns a scarf into a grandmother. So this is a poem called Bath. I think all the references in it, there's a reference to Halo. You guys remember Halo shampoo, right? Halo shampoo, Halo. Halo is the shampoo that glorifies you. Bath. She mops a washcloth down his spine and scrubs until his bones glow with the inner light of porcelain. And when his haloed hair bursts into foam, he holds his nose and dunks beneath the soapy gloom, ears flooding with signals the pipes transmit like microphones. The boy can hear another city, the one below where wind coils when it isn't howling, can hear purgatory boil up through the manholes, a river flushing souls into the underworld, tomorrow's news bawled at the crossroad of subway and sewer. If he were accidentally to swallow here, the water would taste like silver off a dead man's eyes. Upstairs, the mute emigre waitress he secretly adores sings naked in the shower. The newlyweds from Mexico rage about dinero. Next door, a newborn wails like a black Mariah, while in a hidden room, a crazy old man won't stop repeating, the goddamn. And then the boy comes up for air, eyes burning, rinsed hair silky, his hands wrinkled, Busha says, as prunes. Overhead, the bare bulb fogs with steam. She jerks the plug. The drain gulps, a vortex of gray bath water. It's time to rise before it sucks him down, to stand calf deep, lacquered with ivory, smoldering before a faucet that trickles a cool stream at which Busha washes him, first gently in front and then behind, in a way that no one else will ever wash him. The moon too must be fogged above misted lamps that bleed into reflections on the marbled pane. He swipes abstractions in the sweat finger-painting night, while Busha towels his hair, as if reviving a drowned sailor the sea has graciously returned. Don't worry, Busha. Your grandson is clean for Saturday night. Ears, navel, nails inspected, teeth unstained, cleansed as baptism leaves the soul, pure enough to sleep as you instruct him, with the angels, cleaner than he'll ever be again. So, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.